The apartment building at 33 Elm Street cast a long, imposing shadow over the quiet neighborhood. It had seen better days, its once grand exterior now faded and worn, with patches of peeling paint and ivy that seemed to cling to the walls like a sinister presence. I had moved in there just a few weeks ago, desperate for a fresh start after a painful breakup. Little did I know that this new beginning would take a chilling turn. The first few weeks passed without incident. I began to establish my routine, unpacking boxes and decorating my modest one-bedroom apartment. The neighbors I encountered in the hallways and elevators seemed friendly enough, exchanging polite smiles and nods. But there was an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was in the dead of night when it all began. As I lay in my bed, struggling to fall asleep, I heard a soft, eerie whispering. At first, I dismissed it as a figment of my overactive imagination, the product of a tired mind trying to adjust to a new environment. But the whispers persisted, growing more distinct and unsettling with each passing night. The source of the whispers remained a mystery. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the very structure of the building held secrets it was reluctant to reveal. I'd sit up in bed, straining to listen, trying to decipher the words, but they were always just beyond comprehension, like a language I had never heard before. One night, as I was on the verge of drifting off to sleep, a sudden deafening crash shattered the silence. I jolted upright, heart pounding, and instinctively reached for the bedside lamp. It took a moment for my racing mind to register that the noise had come from above the apartment directly overhead. I rushed out into the dimly lit hallway, my bare feet cold against the tiled floor. The corridor stretched before me, seemingly endless, the dim overhead lights casting long, eerie shadows. I followed the sound of my neighbor's panicked voice, Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment above mine. I found her standing just outside her door, clutching a worn, moth-eaten shawl tightly around her trembling shoulders. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her voice quivered as she pointed a shaky finger toward her ceiling. She muttered incoherently about the shadow and the darkness. My gaze followed her trembling finger, and that's when I saw it, a grotesque, shifting shadow cast on the ceiling above her. It defied explanation, its form twisting and writhing in ways that seemed impossible. It was like a living entity, a shapeless mass of darkness that oozed malevolence. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the shadow, unable to tear my eyes away. It seemed to pulsate with an otherworldly energy, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I couldn't make out any discernible features or form. It was as if the very concept of darkness had taken on a nightmarish life of its own. The shadow persisted for only a few moments, but it felt like an eternity. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving Mrs. Johnson and me in a state of shock. She clutched her chest, gasping for breath, and I struggled to find words to comfort her. That night, I returned to my apartment with a chilling unease that had settled deep in my bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong at 33 Elm Street, and that the unsettling events were only just beginning. Desperation and fear had driven us to gather in the dimly lit basement of 33 Elm Street. We huddled together, the flickering light of a single lantern casting eerie shadows on the damp, crumbling walls. The air was thick with tension as we leafed through old newspapers and records, hoping to uncover the secrets hidden within the building's past. We learned about Elias Blackwood, the man whose dark practices had cast a shadow over our lives. According to the faded articles, Elias had been a recluse, rumored to be involved in occult rituals that chilled the bones of even the bravest residents. He had lived in the very apartment we now considered cursed, and his disappearance was shrouded in mystery. As we delved deeper into the story of Elias Blackwood, a sense of unease settled upon us. There were tales of strange symbols etched into the walls of his apartment, symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. It was said that blood had been spilled during his rituals, and that the very air in his apartment had been tainted by the darkness of his practices. With trepidation, we decided to investigate Elias's abandoned apartment. As we crossed the threshold, the atmosphere grew oppressively cold, and the dim light bulbs in the hallway flickered ominously. The apartment's entrance creaked shut behind us, sealing us inside as if the building itself conspired to keep us there. The interior was a vision of macabre horror. The walls were adorned with sinister symbols drawn in dried blood. Candles, their wax long melted, still stood upright, their flickering flames casting eerie, dancing shadows across the room. The air was heavy with an otherworldly presence that seemed to press against our chests. In the center of the room, the culmination of our dread awaited an elaborate pentagram drawn in crimson, its lines uneven and jagged as if etched by a trembling hand. At its heart lay a grotesque sigil that pulsed with an unsettling energy. The whispers that had haunted us for weeks grew louder, as if the very walls were joining in a cacophony of despair. It was then that the shadow manifested itself, a swirling mass of darkness that defied comprehension. Its form was amorphous, constantly shifting and contorting like a living nightmare. The room seemed to pulsate with its presence, and a palpable malevolence filled the air. One by one, my fellow residents succumbed to the shadow's malevolent grasp. Their bodies twisted and writhed in grotesque contortions, their agonized screams echoing in my ears. Blood oozed from their eyes and mouths, staining the floor and walls in a horrifying tableau of death. I stood, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, as the shadow enveloped them, consuming them utterly. I was the last one standing, a witness to the unspeakable horror that had unfolded. Paralyzed by fear and disbelief, I knew I had to find a way to confront the malevolent force that had taken hold of our apartment building. But as I stared into the abyss that was the shadow, I couldn't help but wonder if I had any chance of surviving the nightmare that had become my reality. With nowhere to run and no one left to turn to, I knew I had to confront the shadow and put an end to the horror that had consumed 33 Elm Street. My heart pounded in my chest as I gathered my resolve, determined to unravel the sinister mystery that had plagued us. In the dim, blood-soaked apartment, I stood at the epicenter of Elias Blackwood's ritual. My hand shook as I clutched an old, leather-bound book we had found among his belongings. Its pages were filled with arcane symbols and cryptic incantations, a testament to the dark path Elias had chosen. The symbols etched into the floor seemed to pulsate with malevolent energy, and the candles cast eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. The whispers in the room grew louder, a cacophony of voices that echoed with the suffering of those who had fallen victim to the shadow. With trembling hands, I began to recite the incantation from the book. The words were foreign and guttural, their meaning lost to time, but I could feel their power coursing through me. As I chanted, the air grew colder, and the room seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly force. The shadow reacted violently to my incantation. It writhed and contorted, its form shifting and twisting in a grotesque display of rage. It let out a high-pitched screech that reverberated through the apartment, causing the candles to flicker wildly. I could feel the shadow's malevolence pushing back against my efforts, trying to break free from the bindings of the ritual. But I refused to yield. I continued to chant, my voice growing stronger and more resolute with each passing moment. The symbols on the floor began to glow with an ethereal light, and the room seemed to tremble with the clash of opposing forces. The battle between light and darkness raged on, the apartment becoming a battleground for supernatural forces. Sweat poured down my brow, and my voice grew hoarse, but I pressed on. With a final, desperate cry, I completed the ritual, pouring every ounce of my willpower into it. A blinding light erupted from the symbols on the floor, filling the room with a searing brilliance. The shadow let out one final, agonized scream, its form unraveling like smoke in a strong wind. It fought against the blinding light, but it was futile. In an instant, it was gone, leaving behind only the lingering echoes of its torment. The apartment fell into an eerie silence, broken only by my heavy breathing. The candles extinguished themselves, and the symbols on the floor faded away. The room felt cleansed, purified of the malevolent presence that had plagued it for so long. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I stumbled out of the apartment, leaving behind the dark history and the horror that had haunted 33 Elm Street. The building felt different, lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The nightmare was over, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain with me forever. A chilling reminder of the unknown forces that can lurk within the confines of a seemingly ordinary apartment building.